Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
At Ask the A&Ps, we do our best to answer your toughest maintenance questions. We don't always succeed, but we do our best. So if you have a maintenance question, please contact us via email at podcasts@aopa.org for a chance to get on the show.
Please follow or subscribe and be alerted when a new show comes out so you can hear our questionable answers.
Yeah. And if you'd like to get on our email list, the easy way to do that is to text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777, and your phone will ask you for your name and email address and put you on your mailing list. You can also go to the Savvy Aviation website if you wanted to do it that way.
So I don't know if you guys saw on AvWeb that Colleen Aviation that operates the Mars fire drop aircraft.
Oh, the big 4 engine
was about to retire.
Yeah, that's awesome airplane.
The scoopers, the amphib scoopers. Yeah, they're about to retire the Hawaii Mars, and before they put that last
one.
Yes, before they put that last flying firefighting aircraft in a museum, they're offering aviation experiences for people that want to pony up a fistload of money, where you get to start the airplane up, pre-flight it, taxi it around the lake, and then shut it down. you don't actually get to fly, which I completely understand, but but you get the experience of running the engines and, doing a mag check and taxiing it and getting it up on step or whatever.
I can only imagine.
Get it up on the step?
Airplane that's moving.
Well, I don't know that. They don't say that. They actually
that would be exciting.
I don't know. And I'm not a float plane operator, but my husband has a float plane rating. And I thought, wow, what a great gift this would be for the guy that pretty much has everything, until I saw how much it cost. And then I said, he's not worth that much. So I backed off.
How much did it cost?
There's a two-tier program. For half a day, you get to pre-flight and be a passenger, I believe, as they taxi around the lake. And that's $5,000 a person.
Ooh,
and then if you want to operate the controls yourself and spend a full day and really immerse yourself, that's $15,000. So that's 15 divided by 4. That's like $6,000 per engine to run the.
My goodness! So I wonder how many people that includes.
And actually, they'll let you do it free if you agree to change all the spark plugs.
Yeah, right. And supply new ones. Yeah. So that I believe that's per person. So the wife doesn't get to go along, but I don't know for certain.
But no, what I meant was how many support people. Because, this airplane is not just there's 2 people up front. There's all sorts of other people that get involved.
I'm pretty sure it's not like just you and the support crew. It's probably a group of people on board that get to switch in and out of the seat. But I don't know the details. They don't say on the website, but they did say they sold out in a very short period of time.
Wow.
So there was a lot of interest.
The question that popped into my mind is how do they handle this with their insurance company?
Well,
they're not flying.
Yeah, they're not flying.
But they could severely damage this thing.
There's somebody in the right seat at all times. Yeah. It's like a lesson, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's going to a museum. How bad could the damage be?
Yeah, actually, flying boats are a lot tamer on the water than float planes are.
They probably make you wear a life preserver while you're in the pilot seat. I don't know. But what a cool thing, right?
That would be unspeakably cool, yeah.
Yeah. So, but we're not going to do that.
I wonder how long it takes. I wonder how long it takes to pre-flight that thing.
Half a day, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
How do you pre-flight it, in a rowboat or something?
They've actually got a YouTube video. It doesn't show all the details, but there is it's a process for sure.
Is it okay to move the rudder back and forth?
You're right.
If you can reach it, probably.
If you can reach it, yeah. I've always thought, of course, Dad was mechanic on B-29s back in World War II in China, Burma, India. And I've always wanted to go for a ride on Fifi or Doc. And, that's not cheap, but I don't know. Every year at Oshkosh, I think about it. I never do
they're
it.
coming this year.
Yeah, both of them are going to be there.
So no excuse, Paul.
No excuse.
Just
I'll run
money.
that by Helen. It's just money. That's true.
Money. It's a once in a lifetime thing.
Yeah, I want to sit up somewhere in the cockpit. You can ride in different places for different values. I think up in the nose is the place I'd want to be. Oh well, I got to think about that.
Yeah. So, did anybody see the Mars aircraft do a drop at Oshkosh a couple of years ago? I missed it.
I did too.
They had one of them up there, and they did a drop along the runway, and I hear it was spectacular.
Wow, a lot of
Mike
water.
Mike was probably giving a talk and missed the
Probably
thing.
so. Oh goodness.
Anyway,
I bet that's a whole bunch of water.
I'm still on the lookout for aviation experiences that my husband hasn't had yet because he's trying to do them all. So
he's kind of done pretty much everything, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's done a lot. But
so
they
landed this Mars on Lake Winnebago and scooped up some of that water. Is that what they did?
I guess
so.
Yeah, I think it was actually parked at the seaplane base for a while.
Oh God, that must have been cool. I'm sorry I missed that.
Yeah.
So our first question is from John, who wants to know how much he should move the rudder. Good to see you, John.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question, guys. So I'm in a club, and we have a Cessna 172, November 1979. And as I was doing my pre-flight one day, one of the other members was coming into the hangar. I was around the back of the plane, and I was moving the rudder back and forth. And he's like, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. That linkage is connected to the steering up front, and you could damage the linkage there or whatever." But it says in the operating handbook to make sure it's free and secure. So I don't know how else you do that other than moving it back and forth.
I don't
think you can tell by looking at it. I'm not sure you can tell by just looking at it. So, and I did hear some things online that, there are some, rudders that are hard linkage, I guess, to the steering, but I don't think ours is. I mean, we have the bungee, right? Yeah.
Yep. Not on yours.
Yeah, if you are moving the rudder back and forth, especially if you're moving them to the stops, it's important to hold the rudder like at a rivet line and not bend the sheet metal.
Yeah. So
but you're not going to damage the nose wheel steering bungee. If this was a Cherokee where it was a hard connection, that might be a different story.
So here's how your 172 operates. You have the rudder and the two cables that go to the rudder pedals. The tension on those rudder pedals is created by a couple of springs that pull the pedals toward the firewall. So there's not a cable tension per se. You adjust the turnbuckles until the pedals are a certain distance from the firewall, like 6 inches. And that's it. Whatever the tension you get is what you get. The steering bungees that your friends are talking about are actually between the rudder pedals and the nose gear.
Yeah.
So if they're worried about you moving the rudder barely moves the pedals, not a whole lot. But when you get in the airplane and move the pedals in their full deflection, the nose gear doesn't move because the airplane's not moving yet. That's where you're putting on the stress on the steering bungees, and they're absolutely designed to do that. So you're causing no harm whatsoever, and you're operating it and testing on the ground exactly like you should.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, so we did have an issue one time with the, it might have been the rudder or the steering bungee, because one time I think the rudder was like full deflection and the pedal was like kind of sitting low, and I'm not even sure what the mechanic did. So I think there might have been some confusion that maybe we were doing something, maybe moving it back and forth. But I'm glad to hear I'm not damaging anything, so it's good.
No,
I love it when I'm on the ramp and somebody walks up to me and says, "You shouldn't do that." I'm like, "Who the heck are you? Where are you coming from?"
The airport safety police.
Oh my gosh!
Hey, it's my airplane. Don't tell me what to do.
I mean, moving the controls gently. You're going to be doing that in the air. You're supposed to do a control check before you take off.
Well, so when I do various classes, there's always a placard, especially back on the tail of the rudder, says no push. And it's on the Cirrus, it's on all of them. And I try to explain to people, it isn't the push left and right or up or down. We're not pushing the airplane around on the ramp.
Yeah.
It's not meant to relocate the airplane by pushing.
Or don't stand on it or something.
Yeah,
like
don't
that.
stand on it, that kind of thing. Yeah.
But
So
those
you're all good.
Good to know. So you guys all agree again? That's two in the session. That's cool.
Yeah,
Oh gosh, and he pointed it out.
We better go play the lottery.
The next caller will have big disagreement. We're going to plan on it.
We're saving ourselves for the next.
Saving ourselves.
Well, thanks again.
That was a good question.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks again.
All right, John. Thank you.
Be skeptical out there, John.
Hey, wait a minute. I do need to say something though. When you're doing this check, because it's a short call, so I'm going to give you a little tidbit here. On the strutted wing single engine Cessnas, like a 152, 72, and 82, your aileron bell cranks have an internal stop that's fixed. It's not adjustable. So when you do this control check, which you should absolutely do it on both ailerons and listen. When the aileron goes up, there should be a definite clunk, a metal-to-metal contact on that side, and the same thing in the down position. And you should hear the same thing on the left aileron, clunk up and clunk down. If you don't, then your ailerons are not going through their full travel, and they need to be properly rigged.
Well, good to know. All right, I'll mention that to the other member then. Not only was I doing it right, but something else that I should be doing right.
Something else that they don't know about. Yeah. There you go, John. You are now prepared.
With your knowledge.
The all-new clunk check.
Wait for the clunk.
Clunk check.
Clunk check.
Every airplane should have a clunk. All right. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, our next question is from Jeff, who's trying to use his airplane to harvest corn. Go ahead, Jeff.
Bad idea, Jeff. Bad.
I know. Hi, folks. Love listening to the show. Gotta say, I didn't expect to be on the show with the problem, but hopefully a little help from the play here. We'll be back in shape. So I fly a Piper PA-12. It's got a Lycoming 0235 C1 Macaulay metal prop, and I did a botched short field landing a couple of weeks ago. I really don't want to spend the time on the landing. We don't have that kind of time. But
understood.
The short answer
He's still
is,
going through the 5 phases of grief on this one.
I am. It's a process, right?
Yes, it is.
But I tried to do a go around, and I ended up hitting some corn at full speed, right? And then I eventually came to a stop in the field, covered up with corn, and
So you had a sudden drop in RPM.
Well, that's the question. So I think we're going to have. I think that's maybe the critical question, isn't it? Right? Yes.
Well, did that stop the engine, or did you stop the engine?
No. I stopped the engine.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's the heart of it. So I actually wasn't even thinking prop strike when I went through there. I was actually more concerned about not nosing over, not ground looping, and we pulled it out. And I started to come down from that event and did my due diligence, and started looking to see is that a prop strike? I pulled open Lycoming's Service Bulletin 533C, which scared the crap out of me, and then I read a bunch of sort of random opinions on the internet, which scared me more. So I called my A&P, who he's a great guy, and he came over and we did some forensic analysis of the scene, and there's some relevant details that I think are key here, right? So first is the corn was like 40 inches tall, so it wasn't really tall corn. We measured it. I'm an engineer. That's how we roll. But it definitely hit the prop, right? And there was no prop stoppage. And Paul, to your point, I actually didn't even notice a drop in RPM. But
you were a little bit busy at that moment.
If I'm being completely honest, right? In all the excitement, I might not have noticed a drop.
I don't think your eyewitness account is going to be particularly valid.
I think that's fair enough. But I will say that for the first half second, I actually really thought I was going to climb out until I didn't. And so it was close, but anyway, if you walk the corn afterwards, you can see about 50 good feet of, I'll call it, splintered corn. Yeah, it was splintered stalk. And after 50 feet, the quality of the cut on the corn changed. So you do a little math. I did some math. I figured 50 feet, if you're going 40 RPMs, that's about a second, which is, pretty reasonable time to pull the power back. And then I drifted another couple hundred feet at idle. So I didn't hit just one stalk of corn. Like I hit a lot of corn. It wasn't particularly corn.
What did the prop look like?
It looked great. There's a little green on it, but absolutely
pristine.
not a mark on it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So look, there's two possibilities. The first possibility, which is the one I prefer, is to say you didn't have a prop strike. Because you had no noticeable. I mean, and the reason you couldn't climb out is not because the RPM was reduced. It was because you're dragging landing gear through all this corn.
I had bushels of corn in my undercarriage. Yeah.
Yeah. So it had nothing to do with the prop or the engine or any of that. You didn't climb out because you're trying to.
I'm going to have to
burrow in
quibble
this corn with your landing gear.
I'm going to have to quibble when you get done, Mike.
Oh, really? I'm sure you will. But anyway,
I'm reading this service bulletin.
I mean, this is like kind of up to you and in consultation with your A&P. But so one possible interpretation is you didn't have a prop strike and you have to worry about it. Get the corn out of the shock cords and you're good to go. The other interpretation is that you did have a prop strike, that you had a reduction in RPM. If that's the case, there's an AD, unfortunately, that says that you have to pull the accessory case off and
not a tear down,
replace some hardware. But you certainly don't have to tear down the engine.
That's still
and the Lycoming service bullet is just a service bullet, and you can
it's a recommendation. Yeah.
Turn it into a ball and throw it in the trash. It's not. It's not anything you're worried about, and meaning honestly, there is zero possibility of internal engine damage from an event like this.
From grass, from vegetation. Now, Paul thinks differently, though.
No, so here's my view, and I agree that it's really not likely that there's damage. I have done an awful lot of prop strike events, lots and lots and lots of them, where the propeller comes apart, where it doesn't come apart, high power, low power, and all that. And so far in my very short life as an airplane mechanic of, I don't know, however 50, whatever years, I have yet to find a single engine that had rotational damage due to a prop strike. That doesn't include magnetos and some of the peripherals, but the engine.
Yeah, the magnetos are probably the most vulnerable thing.
Yeah. So in my assessment of the prop strike is that the propeller is made to go through air, and now it's going through something that is thicker than air in the form of corn stalks. I find it highly unlikely that there wouldn't have been a lowering in the RPM going through the corn stalks. And corn stalks
for
go really fast.
1 second, Paul.
Well, it's a matter of degree. So I think
if it's not a measurable reduction in RPM,
but we don't know that it was measurable because it was short duration and we don't have a device to measure it. So we're just talking about the probability, or did it or did it not. So in my view, there's probably some reduction. As Mike said, it's totally your decision. You're the airworthiness decision maker.
And by the way, I have to add that I only outlined two possibilities. The one that you say I didn't have a prop strike, and the other that you say I did have a prop strike and I need to comply with the AD. There is a third possibility. The third possibility is hey, I would really like to tear down my engine and have my insurance company
Insurance pay for
pay
it.
for it.
That's true.
And that's a
true.
perfectly reasonable, thing to do too. But you wouldn't be tearing down the engine because you think anything's wrong inside, because I guarantee you there's nothing wrong inside.
Yeah.
You do it because you have an opportunity to have the insurance company pay for something that you would ultimately have to pay for later on.
They'll pay for some of it.
If
But
you're
at the
My
end of the
experience is that they kind of finance it, right? They get it back out of you later, right?
they finance some of it. Depends on what you have done. So my only thought is, I think there was probably some sort of reduction in RPM. It would have been minimal. It would have been short duration. Did it do any damage? I can't imagine it would have done any
If it
damage.
didn't damage the propeller, it surely didn't damage anything else. The propeller is the
magneto.
Well, but we're not talking about damage here. So I'm not disagreeing about whether there's damage. I'm just talking about whether there was a reduction in RPM, which means it would meet the qualifications.
which is a
And
technicality, basically,
Which is a technicality.
not a safety of flight issue.
Right, exactly. So if we're going to go with the technicality, the AD refers to portions of the service bulletin as ADs will do. They will not say you go comply with all of service bulletin so and so. It won't do that, because then the FAA gives up like the when to part of the bulletin. And all the FAA, if you look at the AD, it specifies that you comply with very specific paragraphs within the service bulletin. And all you have to do is take the accessory housing off, put on a new gear, new tab, and a new pin. It's pretty minimal. Believe it or not, I've actually even done it on a Mooney without taking the engine off the airplane.
Really?
Now, yeah, that's how crazy I am.
Are you a
But
midget? Yeah.
I didn't know
on
Mooney's had
your
that
PA,
much space behind.
well, you do have to take a couple of other things off, like the prop governor
Like the
and things
fuselage.
like that. Yeah, but the on your PA-12, which is a phenomenal airplane, there's quite a bit of room back there.
Mhm.
You don't have to. We're not pulling the engine. We're not doing any of that.
One of the engine shops felt like they could do it with the engine on, but they advised it would be easier to take it off and
sure.
have it,
Well, sure.
have it halfway towards.
It'd certainly be easier on the engine.
It's
shop
not
to
their
take it
money.
off.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll send it to them. But what struck me, and we kind of landed where you were, Paul, with me and my A&P, that there's an AD, and where you were, Mike, there's an AD. There's a service bulletin. It kind of strikes me funny that Lycoming has two service bulletins that compete with information. But the other thing is, I called two separate engine shops, and one engine shop said that they wouldn't do anything but a full teardown. There was just no way.
Oh, sure.
It was a very reputable engine shop. And another engine shop said, well, you really technically don't have to do anything, but if you want to do something, we'll do exactly what you said. We'll pull the accessory case off. We'll take a good look around. Probably nothing wrong with it, but you get the peace of mind, and you'll part with a couple $1,000, but it'll be okay.
So let me give you a little bit of history on the service bulletin. If you read the original version of the service bulletin, I don't think it had anything to do with props. Now, this is personal opinion, so just make this real clear. This is just my personal opinion. But on the older engines, the crankshaft gear had on the flange part of the gear that actually mounts to or mates with the crankshaft, had very small scallops. And the AD required that you take that gear off, send it for modification to increase the size of the scallops, or put on a different gear with the new scallops in it. And in my view, that's really what they wanted to do.
This is the radiusing, basically.
Oh,
Right, the radiusing
they were trying to
of
take
that
care of
plane.
another problem by using this as an excuse.
And they use prop strike as the excuse to get the new gear on. And I have done, I'm trying to think. So I've done prop strikes. The most common is either going to be a Mooney or a Piper Arrow. And we've done a bunch of those in the past. We used to do them in-house, and we would take that gear off, and the dowel pin is kind of the thing in question. I have never seen a dowel pin with any damage whatsoever. So now I'm not trying to tell people, hey, ignore this thing, because it's not something to be ignored. But you have to think through, like in your situation, you went through corn, it didn't do any damage to the prop. How serious is it? But then at some point, you're like, well, I don't want to get stuck in some sort of quagmire. It's not a big deal. Your local mechanic can pull the accessory housing off. This doesn't need to go to an engine shop. It's just a couple of gaskets. The oil sump gasket, you just cut the back end off of an oil sump gasket, put a little Permatex down there in the corner. It goes back on. This is not a big deal if you choose to go that way. But as everybody said, you can decide, because you're the one in charge of the airworthiness of the airplane. You make the call as to whether this even has to be addressed.
So can you sleep at night?
I appreciate that. I can't sleep at night. I'm going to have to do something. For the small amount of work and my peace of mind, it's worth it. So would you guys look at you guys would look at the mags as well? Yeah,
while they come off for the accessory.
If you're gonna do the peace of mind thing, the mags are already off. I would send them out for a 500-hour mag inspection.
Yeah.
They're probably coming due anyway.
Yeah.
I just slid that in there. That's how we mechanics do that.
Maybe it's a good reason to get a shore fly, though. I don't know. We'll see.
Personally, if it were me, and I'm disagreeing with Paul here, if it were me, I would declare it a non-event.
Yep, there you go.
I think I would declare it a non-event too. I've had grass stains on my prop, and I just kept flying. Clean them off first.
Yeah, clean them off. You get rid of the evidence.
Yeah, I didn't land in corn, but
you don't want the airport safety police coming around and
Oh, I was landing on a runway. It was just not cut grass. It was tall.
Yeah, so there's real close to a 0% chance that there's any damage. But again, if you're the one flying in the airplane, you have to have that warm, fuzzy feeling. If you want a warm, fuzzy feeling, I would do the minimum, the absolute minimum.
Yeah. And, I have a feeling, I love the fact that most of these are written by lawyers. I'm having trouble categorizing the risk of doing nothing,
Doing this thing with the accessory case, apart from the AD, but it wouldn't make me feel any fuzzier. I mean, you do that thing, there's not going to be any damage. You put it back together, and now you have an oil leak. Okay.
Right.
I didn't have an oil leak before. Now I have an oil leak.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
it's one of those.
You now have multiple opinions. You're going to have to go.
If you take it apart. Just to put this out there, because it's real, your chance, if you do nothing, there's that ever so slight chance that maybe something is going on that you don't know about. If you take action and attack this engine with tools, your chances of a maintenance-induced failure just went up 100%.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So and I'm not saying that's a reason to not do something.
Am I quietly hearing Paul coming around to my position?
Yeah.
No. I just want to make Jeff aware that once he attacks this engine with tools, don't expect that to be the end of it, because it's not this is wonderful, it fixes everything. Yeah. Now you've opened up this engine and you've put other things into the mix. The torquing of the bolts, was it done right? Did somebody leave a shop rag in there? I'm just saying every solution has its problems. And if you want the warm fuzzy,
don't touch in it.
There's if
it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, in Jeff's mind, he's not sure that it isn't broken.
I can't tell. I mean, I'm not.
Well, look,
I don't have
there is no objective record of RPM. The only data that we have of RPM is his recollection. And his recollection was, I was not aware of any drop in RPM.
Yep.
That's good enough for me.
And so let me toss it in there. If you decide there's not a prop strike, I can't tell you how many Lycomings I've done prop strike AD compliances on. And I said it before, I've never seen that dowel pin have any sort of damage at all.
And also keeping a logbook entry out of the logbook that says the word prop strike is probably a good thing for the value of the airplane, right?
That's another consideration.
Not wanting to be sneaky, but
Well, yeah. If I'm making a decision about whether to do this or not, it's going to be in my head of, is this the safe thing to do? And then after you decide it's the safe thing to do, then you can decide how to do.
It goes in the don't report it column. I mean, it might not be.
The worst part of this is that he's come on this podcast and now everybody in the world is going to know about it.
Yeah, but we haven't said his last name or N number. I think he said
that's right.
No N number here. Yeah.
But for all we know, his last name is Lucky because that's what is on his shirt. We call him Jeff Lucky, and people can start Googling that.
I wouldn't put little corn stickers along the side of your fuselage. That might be a dead giveaway.
We have a local guy with a Bonanza that has 5 birds on the side of his airplane.
Gosh.
Well,
I appreciate the perspectives. Thank you. It was great hearing.
And you're not going to tell us what you're going to do.
I'll send a note in. Whatever I do, I'll send a note in. I'll send some pictures in of what actually happened, and it'll add to the database of whether or not there was damage or there was not damage.
And no judgment. No judgment. Yeah. Whichever way you decide to go, you got to do it. Feels good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Fun talking with you. We love the PA.
Yeah, that was fun.
Our next question is from Tyler, who's having fun with performance charts, and he's about to baffle us. Go ahead, Tyler.
Okay, so I currently don't own a plane, but I've kind of been thinking about my mission, and the Turbo Arrow checks a lot of boxes for me. And in the time of trying to find the right partner or work out the financials, find the right plane, I've been immersing myself in operation procedures. So I'm an engineer by trade, and I love everything that we talk about with data is king, and understanding what we're actually doing inside of the engine. So as I've been reading the engine for that particular plane, maybe a couple other types of engines. I've been kind of studying what my procedures would be on takeoff, climb, cruise, and the Aero 3 Turbo has the TSIO 360 Continental. The manual is, as I've found that, dug it up from the depths of wherever you can find it. It does have pretty good performance charts. It does list 38 by 2100 RPM as 75% power. That equates to 17 inches over squared. What would be feasibly too much over squared? What would be the diminished return on engine health? And obviously the charts list some other things like 41 inches by 23. It's overboosted to 41 inches. So 41 inches by 2300. It's listed as an option on the charts. That equates to 82% power. But what could be the diminished return of going too much over squared on especially turbo applications?
So what do you mean by diminished return? So what would be the return that you're expecting for flying it that way? Which, by the way, I agree with that. I just want to know what it is that you're expecting.
I guess either from a reliability standpoint, that something could be stressed too much inside the engine, or in some cases, as I've talked to some forum users, they do indicate that you run into bootstrapping, like the RPM won't let you get that much boost in the manifold pressure, and you won't actually get to the.
Well, that would be self-limiting because you'll see it.
Yeah.
It's not happening, then it's not happening.
Yeah, but as it's listed in the charts, I'm assuming those charts were developed in a lab by Continental, and they said, okay, we've done a couple points and we draw a line, and so we can't operate the engine in this range, and then to some degree, if you look at the charts, there is like a cutoff, like I'm trying to pull it up on my charts here.
So the charts that you're looking at, I'm guessing, are cruise performance charts?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So the cutoff is probably going to be
And
anything above that.
You're looking at the chart in the Continental Operator's Manual, not the
Not the
the
POA.
Piper.
Right.
The engine manual. Yes.
Okay, and so you're basically looking at an envelope.
Yes.
That says that these are the authorized. You should operate within this envelope
For cruise. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the most efficient operation is going to be on the lower right edge of that envelope, the maximum over square that they authorize. Okay, so you don't think about over square as a bad thing. Think of it as a good thing. The more over square you run, the better. Okay, but try to stay within their envelope. Not that anything would explode if you didn't, but.
So let me rephrase my question. How did they develop that envelope?
With darts on a dartboard. There's probably not very much science behind it. But and another thing to consider, I don't know what your philosophy on operating Richard Peak versus Lena Peak is, but all of their charts are based on Richard Peak operation. If you're operating Lena Peak, you all the constraints are very far relaxed from that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
Richard Peak is where you have all the detonation
But
issues.
don't consider over square a measure of abuse, because it's not.
Yep.
I sort of have this rule of thumb with that. I don't know if there's a lot of science behind it, that the real measure of abuse on an engine is horsepower per cubic inch. And if the engines like say an 0470 in a Skylane are going to have about a 0.5 horsepower per cubic inch, and it's basically 230 divided by 470. Okay, some of the turbo 360s, like the ones in the pressurized Skymaster that are rated at 225 horsepower, you take 225 horsepower divided by 360, you get a big number. You get, I don't know what it is,
61%.
Yeah, and those engines are the least likely to make it to TBO, because they're trying to pull an awful lot of horsepower out of the displacement. Your engine, Turbo Arrow, if I'm correct, is rated at 200 horsepower for takeoff. So, 200 divided by 360, it's a little more than 0.5, but it's not a horrible number. The 360 is, and I don't know if Paul agrees with this, but the 360 is one of the less robust engines that Continental built. It's kind of a lightweight version of the big bore engines, and it's more vulnerable to pilot abuse. So you do have to be careful with it. But being careful with it is basically being careful with temperatures. Don't worry about over square. That's not what we. But we do want to keep CHTs within reasonable limits, and that's not the kind of thing you're ever going to find in a POH. That's something you only find when you fly the airplane, see how it works out.
Yeah, and I do agree with over square and lead a peak. As I look at that line, I'm wondering if there's opportunity to go further over that line. If you're saying that they developed it, on running rich of peak, do we have our opportunity to go more over squared since we're outside of detonation?
Well, so over squared is, so I really just don't like the term. So instead of saying over squared, because it's kind of a meaningless term in general.
Yeah, why don't we just do it all in metric, and then that whole concept goes away.
Yeah. If you go by millibars, the numbers don't match, and everybody quits talking about it. So that's what I want to go with. But just think in terms of manifold pressure versus RPM, and you have a chart that says this is where Continental has done whatever testing that they've done, and they think that this is acceptable. You can run it any way you want because it never says anywhere, don't run it this way, unless there's some sort of caution. And really the caution you want to be paying attention to is what's in the POH, because the POH is going to be your in-aircraft installed kind of guide.
But again, everything in the POH is based on rich at peak operation.
Right.
So once you've crossed over into the lean at peak regime, where the engine is fuel controlled rather than air controlled, pretty much everything in the POH goes out the window, and none of those charts are applicable when you're running lean at peak. Mm-hmm. And so really the only thing that matters when you're running lean at peak is two things that matter. One is the engine running smoothly or is it running rough? If it's running rough, you're too lean. Yeah. The other is, are the cylinder head temperatures reasonable? If they're unreasonable, then you're not lean at peak enough. And those are the only two things you have to worry about when you running lean at peak. Are the cylinder head temperatures are okay, and is the engine running smoothly?
Yeah. So it's interesting. The POH, on climb out uses words such as, using 100% power till clearance, and then should reduce power to 75% on climb out. The engine manual says that it's recommended to do the same thing, reduce power on climb out. Are they, do we abide by? Both are making some.
It's your engine. You can do whatever you want. But the truth is, if you pull it back, you're probably going to have higher CHTs in the climb. If the engine is set up properly in that climb with everything full in, it's going to run plenty cool. I do this with the 210 guys, the turbo 210s. There is a maximum performance climb in the POH, and it says full throttle, RPM full in, and then it says adjust the mixture to a certain level. And I say, well, forget that part, go full rich. And instead of climbing at 400 feet a minute with CHTs at 400, they climb at 800 feet a minute and CHTs at 380. And it works beautifully. So in your POH or in the engine manual, it never said, well, matter of fact, that engine that you're talking about is rated for 100% power for its entire life.
Yeah.
So you can run it with everything full forward all the time. I'm not saying that's a great idea, but it'll do it. It's rated to do that.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
they recommend that you
typically wouldn't climb at 2,700 RPM just because it makes a lot of noise,
Right.
So typically out of 1,000 feet, I'll pull the RPM back a little bit.
Yeah. And on some of the 210s, the data plate requires that you back the RPM down to 26. So we'll abide by that for sure.
But
so
those,
guys don't.
Some engines have a 5-minute rating at 100% power. But your engine, I mean, the engine you're talking about does not.
So can I jump in? So I've always been taught to bring my engine back after I've reached a safe altitude and continue a cruise climb. Is that just hearsay, or you're?
No, I do that, but I do that because I don't like the noise and I don't like burning huge quantities of avgas.
Yeah, it's not the noise. I don't care about the noise, but I do care about the fuel burn, and I'm trying to be nice to my engine. That was the last thing my flight instructor husband told me. It was like, you should bring your engine back after you're safely off the ground because you need to be good to your engine and not abuse.
Well, you're turbo.
No, I'm not turbo.
You're not turbo?
No.
So on my
then you are pulling the power back even if you don't touch the controls, just by virtue of climbing.
Well, I mean,
it's doing it for you.
We're bringing the RPM from 2,700 back to 25, setting up for a cruise climb. And he also wants me to bring manifold pressure back to 25 inches. And then I keep adding as I climb up because I'm losing.
I wouldn't bring manifold pressure back. No. I always think Mother Nature's going to do that for you, and she doesn't need your help.
Quick. When I take off in my plane, everything's full forward.
Yeah.
I will reduce the mixture in the climb. I leave the RPM up just because I don't care about the noise. And the manifold pressure gets back to 25 inches pretty quick because I'm climbing at 800 feet a minute.
Yeah.
I fly my turbocharged 310. The throttles are tie wrapped to the wide open position, right up until I have to pull them back in order to land. I never ever operated anything but full throttle.
Yeah.
I vary RPM and I vary mixture, and mixture is the big thing when you're running lane to peak. It's your power control. But I push the throttles all the way forward. I never touch them until it's time to land.
Yep.
So in your climb procedure, Mike, turbo and climbing at Lena Peak, how do you safely get through the red box when
Quickly.
you're at 100? Just go straight there, huh?
Yeah.
So it's we call a big mixture pull, and that's a mistake that a lot of people make, and it is quite abusive to the engine, because when you transition from Richer Peak to Lena Peak, you're going through a bad area, an area of low detonation margin, sometimes zero detonation margin.
Mm-hmm.
So you just want to get through that quickly in a couple seconds. You grab the red knob, or in my case, the red knobs, and you pull them back briskly.
Yeah.
And you're going to be leaning to a fuel flow. We're not doing, watching EGTs and TITs and all that stuff.
That's what I'm looking for, is a target to get in the woods. And
you're going straight to a fuel flow, which you can do very rapidly.
The first couple of times you do it when you don't really know what the right fuel flow is, just pull it back until you feel the engine start to lose power.
Yep.
And that tells you you're safely Lena Peak. Then you can fine tune it. After you do it a few times, you'll kind of figure out what the target fuel flow is, and you can pull it back to fuel flow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the key is to pull it back
in less
quickly.
than a second.
Don't ever use the lean find feature of the engine monitor, because to use the lean find feature, it means you have to pull the mixture back really slowly in order for the thing to find peak EGT, and that's the worst thing you can possibly do.
Yep, it made sense in cruise to me, and I postulated at climb that'd be, turbo engine. You're trying to get to the lower flight levels. That's a lot of time that you could save on fuel climbing at Lena Peak. But I didn't know you were operating at 100%, and doing it in cruise seems a little gentler. But I guess you could do it just as quick. And I like having that target fuel flow. That makes me feel better.
Yeah, and again, the thing you should obsess about is cylinder head temperature. Don't worry about over square and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just if the cylinder head temperature remains reasonable, then you're doing it right.
I don't know. Well, that engine, I just got to think through whether I would leave at maximum manifold pressure in the climb. You're probably going to have some heating issues.
Well, you're probably not going to have maximum manifold pressure once you pull the RPM back. It probably, I doubt it. I doubt it. If you pull the RPM back to 2,500 or 2,450 or something for a cruise climb, I bet you can't get 41 inches anymore.
Yeah. That's
I don't know.
True.
We'd have to try it out and see. But
that has the fixed wastegate, doesn't it?
No.
Well, it comes as a fixed wastegate. Everybody's upgrading to a Maryland wastegate. It's probably 50 to 60% of them out there have a controller on them. Some of them still have the old fixed wastegate on them, though, too.
That was not Continental's best idea.
No.
didn't
I
help
think what
out
they were trying to
360.
do. Yeah, Lycoming had has the IO 360, which is a 4-cylinder making 200 horsepower. And Continental wanted to make 200 horsepower, but they just didn't see doing it with 4 cylinders, so they tried 6. And they had to cut weight everywhere they could, and I think they kind of overdid it.
I didn't realize the Turbo Aero had the fixed wastegate. I knew the Mooney 231 did, but I didn't know that the Turbo Aero.
Well, the Seneca does as well. Some of the Senecas.
Yeah,
that's a good idea to get rid of that. Put the Merlin system on.
Yeah.
Well, Tyler, I knew you were going to geek us out. Delivered.
You're now an honorary member of Overthinkers Anonymous.
Yeah, and you don't even own an airplane yet. Imagine what's going to happen when you get an airplane.
Well, like I said, it keeps me distracted, and it keeps me patient while I wait.
Yeah,
Not overanalyzing it.
Get that airplane.
Yeah, get that airplane. Go do some real world experimenting.
Sounds like you're ready. Okay, well, I hope that helped.
Yep. Thank you guys. It did.
Thanks.
All right,
Okay.
Tyler. Thanks for the call.
See you.
Our next question is from Frank, repeat offender, who's trying to get started with electronic ignition. How you doing, Frank?
I'm doing great. Thanks for taking my call again.
Yeah, that means you weren't too bad the first time. So
I guess so. So I have a Cessna Skylane 182, and I just put a SureFly electronic ignition in it, and I've been starting my plane using the Cessna Pilot Association tech guide that said to start with just the battery and then go to the alternator. And so you start the plane with the battery. You see that make sure the engine's operating in the green, and then you see that I have electronic instruments CGR 30P and 30C, and I get the alarm that the alternator is not working. Turn the alternator on, everything comes up. It's great. I see everything's working. So now that I have an electronic ignition, I want to extend that, or see if it makes sense to extend that. Do I start the plane with just the electronic magneto, the EMAG, the SureFly, or is it best to start it with both? Is there a pro and con? Does it make sense to do it one way or the other? Just seeing if there's an extension to that same theory.
I just have a feeling that this is one we're not all going to agree on.
Sorry.
Just a feeling. Okay, who wants to disagree first? Paul, you want to take it?
Go, Paul.
Well, so I'll start. On the older Cessnas, you didn't have a split switch. You turned on the red switch in the alternator and battery came on together. Arguably, if the alternator is engaged, it is creating a little bit of resistance to the rotation because it's trying to generate something. It's probably minuscule, but nonetheless, it could be there. Then if you if you turn the alternator on after it's running, then there's already a load ready, and it could be a sudden jolt on the belt and on, just everything just gets a sudden jolt, so turning things on after the fact, that's what some people are concerned about. It's been done both ways for so many decades. I struggle to find a reason that one way makes enough difference that it matters in terms of just on the alternator, whether to turn it on before or after. So I'm not going to commit on that one. But on the magneto thing, I would start with both mags. Now on a Piper, it's hardwired so that when you engage the starter, only one mag is starting because it's the only
they only have one impulse coupling.
It only has one impulse coupling or shower sparks. But I don't see a reason not to let both ignition systems help start the engine.
Yeah.
So there's my total non-committal answer.
Paul, I'm really disappointed in you because I thought we were going to argue. and
I'm sorry.
It's not going to happen. My opinion is that the only time it makes sense to not turn the alternator on before you start is if you have a almost dead battery, and you don't want to pull that extra amp or two that the alternator field is going to pull from the battery to get as much juice to the starter motor as possible. It's not a good idea to start an engine with a nearly dead battery for a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah.
Mostly that you're going to burn up the battery if you do that.
Yeah.
But except for a depleted battery situation where you can't put it on a charger, I would always have the alternator on to avoid the jolt. Now, frankly, it's more important to avoid the jolt on a gear-driven alternator and less on a belt-driven alternator because the belt is going to be more tolerant of the jolt than the drive coupling on a gear-driven alternator. But it's just not a great idea to turn the alternator on while the engine is running and just all of a sudden put that load on the drive.
So nobody's talking about any voltage spikes through the system, and the fact that we've now got solid state regulators, so we don't have to worry about that. You're all talking about worrying about damaging the alternator or the belt or something. But
So,
wasn't the original,
what about what voltage spikes are you concerned
I
about?
thought the original concern of starting with the alternator and the battery both engaged was that the starting could send a spike through the system that could ruin your avionics, right? That's why you started with the alternator off and you had a split switch.
Why would having the alternator off change any spike? I mean, presumably the spike you're talking about is the spike that's generated when you disengage the starter. Correct.
Oh,
Well, there's two possible. So you're loading the system with the starter, and as soon as you release the starter, of course, you're only operating on the battery at that point. Even if you had the alternator turned on, it's not turning fast enough, I think, to create a
To do
spike.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it can't generate enough power at that point. But if, let's say that the alternator was running, and
No,
you had
the spike thing
load.
is the spike thing is why we don't turn the avionics on until everything is
Right.
running.
I understand that. Yeah. You have a separate.
But that doesn't have anything to do with turning the alternator on or off.
Okay. So the concern is simply damaging the alternator or the alternator engine interface on starting.
Yeah, there's a mechanical jolt when you suddenly turn on the alternator. It goes from has basically no resistance to rotation, and then suddenly a lot of resistance to rotation.
So let's talk about the split switch. Is the split switch there primarily to turn the alternator off if there's an overvoltage situation and you need to shut the alternator? You don't have a breaker to do that?
Yeah, there's an overvolt relay in most of them, but you can turn the alternator on and off separate from the battery.
That's
right.
why
I mean that is how you that's how you reset an overvoltage trip is to cycle the alternator field off and then back on. You can do it with a split switch, or you can do it with a pullable breaker. But
they didn't give us a split switch, so we could start it just with the battery and then add the alternator later. They didn't do that.
I don't know. I mean, those guys are all dead and gone. And they didn't explain why they did it. They just said, "Oh, this is a cool feature. Let's do this."
And I also agree with Paul that there's no reason to disable the tractor mag when you're starting. You might as well have them both running. Frankly, the electronic ignition is going to make a much hotter spark. And probably it's the guy that's actually going to get the engine started. But the problem that I have with starting with the alternator off or starting with one of the mags off is, what if you forget to turn them back on? It just adds another possible pilot error thing. But
he's got a good engine monitor that lets him know.
Yeah, the engine monitor definitely lets me know. I mean, I look at the green and all of a sudden I'm seeing the yellow flashing. Said, "Yep, I need to put the alternator back on." So what I'm hearing is
I would go with option A.
Okay, but you're also saying that starting with just the battery is not a good idea either. You're based on that tech archive from that I've read that it's better to start with both the battery and the alternator.
Well, if everything's healthy. As Mike said, if your battery is depleted, first off, you shouldn't be trying to get going with the depleted battery.
I got a battery minder, so I know for sure that it's in good shape.
So generally speaking, starting with the alternator on is not an issue. A lot of airplanes, it's in the POH to start with the alternator off. And again, I think at low RPM, the shock to the system is minimal. So there actually is one other situation where it's good to start with the alternator off, and that is if it's an APU start, if you're plugged into a cart. Yeah, good point.
That's in the POH, I think. For
most of them, that's in the POH. Hopefully,
which probably means you had a dead battery.
But you should be starting it anyway. You should take that battery out and charge it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will change my starting procedure, it sounds like. So I'll start with both the battery and the alternator. And I've always been doing both mags, and I'll keep doing both mags then.
Yeah. So one thing, you talk about the pilot thing, you got the engine monitor. we sometimes complain about mechanics, but I got to complain about pilots a little bit. Pilots are the absolute greatest at ignoring obvious signs of failure.
Like gear warning horns or
gear warning horns. Thank you, Colleen. I hadn't even thought of that one.
Yeah.
But and so anything that you can do, like Mike says, to avoid that possibility. We talk about leaning on the ground. You want to lean aggressively or brutally so that there's no way you can take off with it leaned. But little things like the 2 cowling plugs that you put on the air inlets, and they have the little flags that stick up like this. And I'll see someone, and there's a cable or cord lanyard that connects the 2 plugs together. And they'll put the plugs in with that lanyard behind the propeller. And I'll tell them, well, you ought to put it around the front. So when you start the engine, it automatically
removes the plug.
Yeah, it automatically removes it. And be sure and embroider the end number of the airplane so they can ship them back to you later and all that stuff. And invariably, it's like the mechanic or the pilot says, oh, well, I've got those 2 flags. I always look for those. And the ones that I find out on the ramp always have the flags. So I'm just saying, pilots are great. So that engine monitor is full of wonderful information, but generally speaking, pilots are great at ignoring that stuff.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a pet peeve of mine that I do have, is that I can't lower the CHT limit down to 400 or 380 on my monitor. That annoys the heck out of me. Because I do look at my engine monitor all the time, and that's why it lights up.
Terrible.
Yeah. I find that very annoying and I have to look and I have to consciously look all during the climb to make sure I'm not over 400.
I'm really amazed that some hacker hasn't posted to the internet how you go into one of those KPI things and change the limits.
Yeah, jailbreak it. Yeah.
Because we know KPI can do it.
Right.
Yep. And they won't do it for a certified airplane. For a primary replacement engine monitor.
Right. Yeah. It's frustrating.
My engine monitor is JPI, and I can program them to whatever I want, but it's not a primary instrument replacement. It's a supplemental.
Yeah, my 930 won't let me do it.
Yeah, the 930 they won't let you do it.
And mine's a primary replacement, so I can't do it either, right?
Yep. So thanks, JPI. Well, thanks, FAA. I don't know what fault it is. Yeah.
Well, my Garmin doesn't even display temperature numbers on my EGTs and CHTs. I get bar graphs, but I have to cycle through to see one at a time for actual numbers.
Oh, really?
And it's a huge screen. It makes no sense at all why they don't put a digital number at the bottom of each bar graph. I mean, Insight does it on the G4. It's like a size 3 font.
Hey, Garmin, are you listening?
Yeah, maybe Garmin's listening. Oh man, that's very frustrating.
Yep.
Somehow
thank you all very much.
Don't need it. Yeah,
I really appreciate
Thanks
the
for the
information
call, Frank.
as always. You bet.
Glad you came back.
All right. Thanks.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, time for a few letters. We've got some good ones. Jim didn't love the story about the shop in Vermont who held the Cirrus hostage because he felt the need to write in and defend mechanics. So he said, Hi, Mike, Paul, and Colleen. For every shop like the one in your recent podcast that grounded the Cirrus in Vermont, there are many smaller shops across the country who go the extra mile to help keep us single-engine guys in the air. Evidence my semi-annual return every 6 months between Minnesota and Florida, a 12-hour, usually single-day flight in my normally aspirated Cardinal. My recent return from Florida took an amazing 5 days en route, thanks to a couple of terrific shops along the way. First, a 0-amp output for my alternator found me landing in western Kentucky at the Murray County Airport. You probably know where that is, Paul, where the local shop moved heaven and earth to source a new alternator, returning me to airworthiness after a 2-night stay, basically. Wow. And he got to use the crew car the whole time, which is cool. Second, my Lycoming 0360 engine started running rough northbound over the Ozarks. So I made a precautionary landing at KFOD, wherein the local shop, which is Fort Dodge Flight Support, found FOD lodged in the carburetor venturi.
Oh, that's good.
Effective and professional troubleshooting by the shop revealed that the rubber-like gasket behind the K&N air filter had deteriorated and was subsequently ingested through the air intake, partially plugging the carburetor venturi. $20 gaskets and two nights later, and he was on his way. So he has good things to say.
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of good shops.
But why didn't he like the podcast story?
I think he felt like he needed
they
needed some defense. It's like,
okay, well, I mean, the thing that made the Vermont story extraordinary was that it was so unusual.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of the. Well, I probably shouldn't
an outlier,
say it, but
that's a good.
It was many standard deviations away from the mean in terms of what I considered to be unconscionable behavior on the part
Mike has just absolved us. There you go with that technical statement.
Yeah.
But
Well, and the reality is most shops are wonderful.
yes.
And so, but when you're telling stories, you don't say, well, 1 out of 200. That was a pretty extreme case, which is what made it worth talking about.
Yeah, we try to talk about good experiences too.
Yeah. So, all right, great. So this is from Dan. You'll remember Cheryl with the Skycatcher and the tinting, where maybe some people around the local airport didn't agree with it. So Dan says, recently on the podcast, there was a question from Cheryl about allowable window tinting in her Skycatcher. She asked about the legality. The host seemed to be opining as to what is allowed.
Guessing's probably better.
Guessing is probably about right.
And then they got derailed discussing cars.
Doesn't take much.
No. So he says, Part 23 defines current aircraft airworthiness standards for normal category airplanes, which we know. He said, so it's a good place to look, even if it's an LSA. And there is actually a regulation, 23.775E, which says the windshield and side windows forward of the pilot's back when the pilot is seated in the normal flight position must have a luminous transmittance value of not less than 70%.
Oh,
that's
interesting.
Great. Okay. So some tinting is allowed, but not more than interesting.
Yep. That I thought was interesting. So
obviously, Part 23 doesn't apply to that particular aircraft, but it is. Having some guidance is always better than not having any guidance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when you buy a windshield, you can get a clear windshield, or you can get a green windshield.
Well, tinted, depending on but those they're approved.
Yes.
Not accepted.
I didn't know there was a percentage that was allowed, though, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
I'll bet you that LP Aeroplastics knew that.
Yeah, that's what
I would hope so if they're the ones making it.
The thing that amazes me is that Colleen didn't know that, because Colleen always studies.
Always knows.
Not the FARs. No, I'm not very good at the FARs, Mike. That's your bag.
Okay, well, I'm a little behind on Part 23.
All right, and finally, JJ talks about, he said he listened to the episode that talked about aggressive leaning with the mixture on the ground and the benefits of doing so, of course, which he had never really done. So he tried it, and amazing to hear that the engine RPM increased as he leaned. However, on the run-up, when he pulled carb heat, there was no drop in engine RPM. So I thought I had an issue with the carb heat and almost scrubbed the flight. So I went back to full rich, along with the slight decrease in engine RPM, pulled the carb heat, and voila, got a drop in RPM. So he says, did I do something wrong, or should you guys have conveyed this important information?
Oh, gosh. Let's do all we can to blame it on him and not us. I mean,
carb heat richens the mixture, right?
Yeah, carb heat richens the mixture.
Hotter air. So if it's already very, very lean, richening it maybe is not richening it enough.
Not richening enough to cause the drop, because the horsepower curve on the rich side of peak, it slopes down very, very gradually.
Okay.
The horsepower curve on the lean side of peak slopes down very steeply.
Okay.
But it takes a lot of richening to cause a meaningful decrease in horsepower when you're on the rich side of peak. So that's perfectly explainable.
But I think what his question was is, should we have made that point
Probably so. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the bad things about the three of us is we all fly fuel injected airplanes, so we don't
That's
do a
true.
Part B check. So that's these letters are all great letters.
Yeah.
So normal
That's a good
behavior
point.
sounds like something that he should expect to experience.
Yeah.
Anybody would.
Normal behavior, and it would have been good if we had thought through that and pointed it out. So
Yeah.
good letter.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right.
Well, heck, that's it for this episode. Hopefully we got a few things right this time around. Let us know what you think and keep sending us your tricky questions. Send us your emails to podcasts@aopa.org.
See you, everybody.
Bye bye, everybody.